we could actually, in a way, filter people, not basis on where they were accidentally born, because I truly believe that today the passport system is flawed because it's a statistical error. I was accidentally born in Estonia and somebody was accidentally born in Afghanistan, and it shouldn't define my future where I was accidentally born.
I'm Ranjor, and this is Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. In each episode, I talk to someone who's trying to change our lives for the better in some meaningful way, whether through a new product, new venture, or a new way of looking at the world. And I try to understand how they came to it, what makes them tick, and what we can learn from them. Today, I'm talking to Karoli Hindriks. Karoli is the CEO and founder of Jobbatical, a startup Forbes named one of Europe's 10 most exciting technology SMEs for 2018. Jobbatical is working on removing the friction of international relocation by making immigration processes seamless through technology. In 2020, the EU Council named her one of the 8 most inspiring women in Europe. In 2021, she was a speaker at the TED conference in Monterey, California, talking about reinventing the passport. In this conversation, we discuss growing up in post-USSR Estonia, founding her first company at 16, officially becoming the youngest inventor in her country, leading the launch of 7 television channels in Northern Europe, including National Geographic channels and MTV. Her aha moment regarding immigration and migration while in Silicon Valley, the migration and mobility revolution, what Jobbatical is doing to facilitate movement of talent and knowledge to where it's most needed, reinventing the passport for the new global economy and the modern age, and much more. This conversation with Karoli is one of a dozen or so weekly conversations we already have lined up for you with thinkers, designers, makers, authors, entrepreneurs, activists, and impact investors who are working to change our world for the better. So follow this podcast on your favorite podcast app or head over to remakepod.org to subscribe. And now, let's jump right in with Karoli Hindriks. All right, I'm sitting here with Karoli Hindriks. Karoli, welcome to the podcast.
Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting.
And so usually we start these days with the big COVID question, which is, where in the world were you when this all happened? How did it affect your life? We'd love to hear also how it affected your work.
So I was actually, our headquarters is in Estonia. And even though we have offices in different countries, I was actually in Estonia when it happened. So I think in a country like Estonia, which is super low density, so there's a lot of space, but not so many people, it was a great country to spend that time. At the same time, what my company is doing is basically making immigration relocation seamless through technology, which means that moving people is our thing. And when lockdowns happened, definitely affected us. But to be honest, looking back, today we're doing better than ever before. And a lot of those decisions that have brought us here were made during those tough times. So I'm such a believer that everything is for our growth, that I see literally that 2020 tough year helped us to get to the hyper growth that we have now entered. So all in all, it actually ended well, but it was ridiculously hard year for us as well.
Yeah, no, we went through something similar because we fly to places to do workshops with people and we couldn't fly anymore, a lot of cancellations. And then this year is the best year ever. And I'm looking at stats from Israeli taxes, and it looks like this year the taxes are much better than before COVID. So I'm wondering if it encouraged a lot of companies to take risks that they should have taken anyway. Because that's what we definitely did. We went online, we did a lot of online webinars and things that we probably should have done anyway, but it kind of forced us to do it.
I think there's something in it, because I remember even when I was doing my TED Talk in America, one of the speakers was a scientist behind the mRNA, right? And she was telling that actually, thanks to COVID, the scientists took a leap to use this technology earlier than they would have. So I think a lot of not only entrepreneurs, but also science took a leap and was actually bolder than we would have been without it. But I think one of the things that I was slightly disappointed and I was kind of hoping that also the public sector will take that leap, because everybody was forced towards efficiency. And, navigating today in 12 different countries, I must admit that didn't really happen in immigration space. So that's a bummer. I think there was such an opportunity for growth or opportunity for innovation also for the public sector. But yeah, that was a bummer.
Yeah, it even went the other way. I was going to go to Japan for a trip and they don't accept. They're like, no, thank you. We don't accept anyone. And yeah, it's not simple. How did it affect your own travels? Because you are someone who travels a lot.
When the borders were closed, and sometime after, I was more definitely grounded than usually. But I think I started to travel quite early compared to other people, work-wise, but also I took a trip alone to Costa Rica to write my TED Talk last spring. It was actually definitely a memorable experience doing those travels still during the pandemic. So I think one day we will look back and there's a lot of interesting memories of that.
Yeah, for sure. I was in New York when it was still quite closed. And on the other hand, there's some innovation there that I think will stick around. Like all the restaurants are now expanded to the sidewalks to have more outdoor space. And I think that's staying. I don't think anybody will want to roll that back because it's awesome. So I want to start the conversation. We usually try to connect it with the person. And we have this opener question. What's something you learned in childhood or early in life that still drives you today or still guides you today?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And to be honest, I think the answer to this question, is the reason I'm sitting here talking to you today, doing everything I'm doing, is that when I was 16, and this can make me teary, by the way. When I was 16 in school, we had to do the student company, and I was chosen to be the president of the student company. And I was so excited about that I started to brainstorm. So what does this company do, right? And of the brainstorm, I got to an idea, which was like a soft pedestrian reflector, like make fashionable safety accessories that are cool for kids, right? I went home and I shared that with my dad. And he could have said, focus on studies, you're a 16-year-old in Eastern European small town, forget about. But he said, this is such a fantastic idea. You should go to the patent office. And honestly, I had no idea what a patent office is, but I certainly got that my father was excited about something that I had created. And that changed my understanding. And this student company became successful. And I suddenly saw that I can actually, in my head, create ideas that change something. And I became addicted to that. Like, I just didn't want to do anything else than change things.
Yeah. You say that your dad's encouragement really opened up this whole path for you. And that couldn't have started there. It must have been part of your relationship before that. That must have been the kind of person he was.
We tend to forget and really underestimate what encouragement into self-confidence means for kids. Like, I think my dad on that day told me basically, in other words, that I can change the world. And I think that's something we should tell the kids every day, because each of them can do it. But they just don't know it.
That's it's actually, they can't help but do it in a way.
Exactly.
Right. But I keep thinking, I don't have any children, but I keep thinking that probably having a kid is the most impactful thing you can do on the future. There's nothing that compares. I had someone contacted my family recently, and they've compiled the history of the family. And they took it back to this one person a few generations ago. And the person only had one or two children, but there's 1,000 people that now live because of that person. So it's, just like there's no bigger impact on the future that you can make than making more humans and more good humans, so hopefully.
I have an 8-year-old daughter right now, and I'm very curious to see what she will be when she's 18, because she has been traveling the world, learned 5 languages, because, I grew up in Soviet Union, right? Completely locked from the world. And her start has been completely opposite. So very curious to see when she's 18, what will be that human.
Yeah, that's a puzzle I'm guessing most parents have to think about. So you grew up behind the Iron Curtain, and you told the story of the singing revolution in Estonia. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what was that moment? What was it before the revolution? What was this opening up like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in terms of singing revolution, so basically before the Soviet Union collapsed, so our country was occupied. So it's not like we chose to be there; we were occupied, and it was literally like that wall was very thick. Even media, news, like it was full of propaganda and everything. And I was very little. I was like 6 years old when the singing revolution happened. But singing revolution was basically like literally people in Estonia gathering courage to come together to rebel, not by fighting, but by really. And there was an event where there was like 300,000 people, literally from on one square, and starting to sing songs that were all forbidden and starting to sing for freedom. And I remember that not because I knew what was happening, but I remember that excitement because I was sitting on my father's shoulders. And like my mother and father were excited. Something big was happening. I was in the middle of it. Of course, I could be up late, and I was in a capital. So all of those things helped as well. But there was such a hope, and that hope. And singing revolution has been actually named one of the peaceful revolutions in human history. Like people sang themselves to freedom. And now, if you look back, what happened afterwards, because Estonia has done an amazing job by really taking a leap, the 30 years with independence, right? Being like the most digitally advanced, one of the most digitally advanced countries in the world. But this change was people started when the independence happened with nothing. Literally every adult got 10 euros worth of money. So everybody had to be very entrepreneurial, but there was so much hope and there was so much creativity because of what that freedom meant. And I have jokingly said, especially looking at the discussions that have emerged, the Trumps of the world, that listening to these discussions, having actually grown up, seeing what it means when you don't have freedom, I think you listen to those discussions very differently. It's hard to talk about hunger when you have never been hungry, right?
Right. I spent 10 years in America and I have many American friends. And there's definitely an element in American life where they didn't take threats to the democracy very seriously. And me coming from where I come from and having family that survived the Holocaust and learning that history, look at it very differently. Look at it as a very big risk and very possible. Why do you think that it can't happen here? Like what makes you different from any other country in history that lost its freedom? I think Americans are beginning to realize that they're not on a special pedestal when it comes to freedom, that their freedom does need to be protected. But it was a long process and some very serious things had to happen for them to wake up. Going back to those early days of high school, you actually became the youngest inventor in Estonia.
That was fun.
And that started you off. So tell me what these early days were like of like getting into business.
Yeah, so basically the same reflector story. So I actually went to the patent office, and what was funny was that probably I was the youngest person who had ever stepped into that place. And then I was also a young girl, which was like double surprise. So yeah, long story short, I managed to register my idea, then became the youngest inventor, which taught me a lot about storytelling. And I think this is something that over the years I have started to really master in many ways, but this was my first learning because suddenly I invent something. I'm from a small, tiny town in Estonia, from a random school. I'm a girl. I'm inventing something that saves lives. So literally this story, first in the local media, we didn't have social media at that time, right? But took off in the local media and later national media. And suddenly we were like the most successful student company the country had ever seen. It taught me a lot about marketing and storytelling without me even intending to learn it. So super thankful. I actually started my first company out of the student project and continued to run it for some years. And we were at one point super successful, and then I did all the mistakes possible. So I call it my Harvard. Like this was my Harvard. So I learned a lot through that, but definitely it was a really strong start understanding that I want to be an entrepreneur. Like I really want to use my time in creating things that change something.
You did a lot of different things. At 23, you became the youngest CEO of MTV in Europe. Running
fun.
MTV Estonia. That must be fun for a 23-year-old. And then, continued on from there. You said that you got addicted to making a difference. That seems to be a big trend these days, and I hopefully here to stay. But my parents' generation were not looking to make a difference; they wanted a steady paycheck. So, yeah, what do you think is changing here? What's happening that we should be aware of?
That's a good question, and I think it's also a very lucky time to be an entrepreneur because. Like you said, people are looking to make a difference. People who are you potentially could hire want to change something. They don't want to do it for the paycheck only. So if I think about it, I think there's a few different things happening. I think it's connected to also the whole. So machines are doing more and more the work that doesn't require much creativity, right? What it does is basically gives us an opportunity to really use our brain and creativity into creation. And I think the automation and people looking to make a meaning of their life are somewhat connected. And that's what I'm seeing. Like, for example, my company today, we're very mission driven. People feel our mission. They join for our mission. And it's a completely different thing. My parents were in Soviet Union, but even in America or any other country, the incentive to join a company was very different back then. So I do think that it's connected to our ability to really focus on the creativity and work where we can leverage that.
Yeah, because I don't think it's conscious. Is it like maybe they are subconsciously realizing that computers are doing more and more of the drudgery stuff, and they just don't want to get locked into something that feels like you're not being human, you're being a machine. Now that we understand what machines do kind of intuitively. But yeah, my dad is a practical mathematician. He did calculations and models that a lot of the stuff now gets automated. And I guess, yeah, if he was starting his career today, he would look at what's available and can definitely veer towards the more creative side of math. So you tell a story of how Jobbatical started. You tell a story of this aha moment that you had in Silicon Valley. I'd love to hear that story.
Yes, basically, the whole inspiration for Jobbatical started from Silicon Valley when I was in Singularity University, which is a cool think tank in Mountain View. We lived for the summer in the NASA Ames Research Center. And yeah, as I'm a runner, I run a lot. In the mornings during my runs, I have time to think. And every morning I went to the seaside, I always passed Google. So, you are in Silicon Valley, you have a Google, and you think it's like top of the world, right? And I started to think, why is it top of the world? What's going on in this place that those companies that really change industries are coming from this region? Like, what's up with that? Are people just somehow better educated here, eat better food, have more sunshine? Something is up here. So I started to really dig into it, and I found that actually looking at the talent, basically employees in various segments, then it's the smart people who actually move there, not who are born there.
Right.
So thinking then that if those people are ready to move to a place like Silicon Valley, what it would take for us to inspire them to find far-flung cities of the world, like Tallinn, Estonia, that instead of going to take a picture in the old town of the medieval, beautiful old town and then leaving on your cruise ship, how could I inspire them to really join the local founders, companies, live a local life, and through that, this knowledge would be actually transferred to the Estonian companies instead of Silicon Valley companies. So initially, that's where the whole idea started. My initial thesis was that in order to do that, we would have to create like a marketplace for inspiring jobs abroad. We started, we had one hand, we had highly skilled people looking for inspiration. So you could go and work in Malaysia on a Penang island in a tech company, for example. And on the other hand, finding those companies that are looking to bring this highly skilled talent. So we started as a recruiting platform, but we actually pivoted 2 years ago because we moved people through our recruiting platform, people from 53 countries to 37 countries. So those people were hired, but they needed to get there. And so we started to support how to actually get them there, initially in Excel. And our clients basically came back to us saying that, could you do what you're doing for those Jobbatical hires also to other people who we are hiring from other platforms? So suddenly we start to do this recruiting thing, and suddenly we have a second, like a side business, which is immigration relocation. And what we basically learned was that the biggest problem of international hiring is not the hiring part. It's actually the immigration relocation. So in 2019 summer, we pivoted the company, putting full focus on developing technology around the whole hideous immigration relocation process. And that was the best decision for the company. So today, we're not a recruiting company. We are doing immigration relocation. Today, we're already in 12 countries, and we are now starting to expand very fast. It was a true startup pivot story. Like you start to do something, there's a problem, and then you identify that the actual problem is somewhere else. So for us, we didn't even change the mission of the company. What we wanted to give for the world is still the same.
Yeah, the bottleneck was slightly further down the bottle.
Exactly.
So you talk about this whole migration and mobility, it's effectively a revolution. You say something like this is the, most mobile time in human history. People are moving around more. What's happening here that we should pay attention to?
Oh, that's a very good question. And so many things are happening. So first of all, approximately today, there are like 272 million relocations globally. So what it means is basically every 30th person on planet Earth is moving per year. And this has basically doubled within the past 20 years and tripled in the past 40 years. So never before have humans moved as much as they are doing today. And so when we talk about our market or the opportunity that we are and the problem that we're wanting to solve for the world is that of those 272 million, only approximately 4% of relocations are captured by any provider. And the main reason for that is price. Relocation has been expensive. So 96% of who are relocating go through this hideous process because they can't afford to have somebody help them. So basically, this is what we are aiming at. We are really focusing on using technology to get that price down so that more people can actually have a good experience being relocated, right? But the market, I think there are a few other things that are happening. And one of the things, which is funny, because in 2018, we started this process with Estonia first, and now other countries have followed, to create a digital nomad visa. So what we saw, then we were still a recruiting company, but we saw already there that there's a policy hole that on one hand, people want to move in a new country. Sometimes they have the employer in that new country. Sometimes they want to work for an employer who is completely in another country. But the policy actually doesn't allow them to work in that case. They either are tourists or they have an employer. So we started to kind of lobby that there should be a new type of visa, which is basically digital nomad visa, where you are allowed to work, even if you don't have an employer in that country. And fast forward to the pandemic, one of the things that I'm really predicting, and we're starting to see that, is that there will be like an explosion of digital nomads. And why is that? I mean, people have dreams. We all have dreams. A lot of us people have travel dreams. But before the pandemic, many of us didn't know that it's even possible to do. And our bosses also didn't know that it's possible to work remotely. So now there's this experience that I can do my work remotely, which means that there will be what I predict is there will be much more flexibility. And many people who will take 3 months, 6 months, 4 months in a year to travel and work somewhere. So let's say you're an American company and you don't have an entity in Spain, but you are hiring somebody from India who's located in Spain. So now you need payroll, but you also need immigration. And if you provide those two together, literally it opens up the completely work from anywhere promise. Like people can just choose any country in the world to work. That means that not only are we talking about the relocation kind of market that has been here, but now there's a new market emerging that wasn't even here before. And I think this is very much coming thanks to the pandemic and the effects of it.
Is there an element of income tax? Because, I guess if I travel to work somewhere else, I still have a company in Israel. I guess that's where I pay taxes. But is there a kind of an incentive for the host country? Is there a different structure when it comes to nomad?
Yes. So the thing is that you actually, if you're doing what you described, you're working there illegally. Like if it's maybe you are like one A small business, you can take the risk, but let's say Facebook couldn't take that risk. So 5,000 people illegally working in Thailand, right? So I would say this is one thing, but the other thing, and this is, I think, an interesting topic, is that I truly believe that one of the big things that countries need to resolve is that taxes need to be also updated. So the way we actually collect taxes, if you look at the taxation system, and I'm not a tax expert, I'm just like seeing the problems that people are having and companies are having, is that it still assumes that you live in a certain place and you are steady there and sometimes travel somewhere else. It doesn't assume that you are 4 months here and then you're 5 months there and then you're 1 year there. When we started the Estonian digital nomad discussion, one of the things that I proposed was that taxes should kind of become like, you should be able to easily just subscribe, like you're subscribing to a country. So I arrived to Estonia, I say, okay, I will take this package, my healthcare is covered, let's say my kid gets the kindergarten, that I get certain benefits, this is basic, this is standard, and this is premium, right? Countries would benefit so much more if they would actually make it easy to plug in and plug out. And I believe that this will be the future. But again, with the governance, I think there's a constant lag, and that's why things are not working in the world, that there's this lag, private sector and then public sector. So today it's all about counting how many days you are in one country or the other country where you become a tax resident, and then the whole thing is hideous. But I do believe that in the next 5 years it will be solved. I think just like with the digital nomad visa, because it was approved by the parliament in 2020, ridiculously during lockdown, then other countries followed. Now Spain, we have been advising them, Croatia, and this was our hope, that somebody shows the way and others will follow. So I believe that there will be some kind of shift with taxes similarly to that somebody will be bold enough to make a change and really adapt the taxation system also to the modern workforce, and then others will just follow that.
Yeah, I would love to dive in with you in a moment into kind of the ideal. How could this work? How could it look like? But I think many listeners might not fully understand how broken the immigration system is currently. So could you help us understand what's the state of migration in the world?
I think there are a few different things. So I would maybe take kind of the backbone of cross-border movement, which is already broken. And I talked about it in my TED Talk, that's the passport.
Right.
So just the foundation, in a way, passport is like the foundation of how we move cross borders. And the irony of it seems like the holy grail, this pamphlet thing that we have, and then we show, and there's this official that puts a stamp on. And the irony is that, first of all, we started to use passport as a travel document really worldwide after First World War. So it was only a century ago. It hasn't been here a long time. We started to use it like 1 century ago, and basically it looks and feels and works the same way as a century ago. And now if you think about what cars we were driving, we weren't, but our grandparents, right? Then a lot has changed. There's a lack of technology, but there's a second aspect of why passports don't work. And it's because it was actually created by Western-centric organizations. So it was very focused on helping the Western countries and discriminating the others. So it's like the whole system of passports is biased. What is ridiculous about it is that even if you look at today, everybody's fighting for the talent. We have also entered like the biggest talent shortage in human history. So the passport doesn't even help those Western countries anymore. Because if you look at, for example, where the most highly educated countries, people are coming from, those countries are China, India, and Philippines. So completely not aligned with the passport system, because their ranking is far behind any Western country. All in all, I think the first thing that we need to reinvent is the whole identity of relocation. What is the passport, basically?
Yeah, so I want to dive in a little bit deeper. So we're talking about passports that are more travel friendly and passports that are less travel friendly. I even just remember having like that feeling of going into the US it can be hell sometimes, especially in New York, but even going into Europe, and then what passport do you have? Do you have a European passport? Very fast line, very
exactly.
nice. Do you not have a European passport? Okay, well, this is going to suck for you. And yeah, like, why did we do it like this? What was the idea behind it originally when it was created?
It was created by Western countries. It was still connected to the assumption that Western countries, that's where education is better, that's the skills are better, so we will let them in more easily. The thing is that it's not relevant today. It's absolutely not relevant today. So we still use the system that based on the fact that non-Western countries, people are not educated, do not have skills, so we don't let them in. And so basically it's not working anymore, but we're still using the same framework. So that's, I think, the core thing that we need to change. And the fun fact was that I actually, when I went to do my TED Talk in August to America, which was hideous because you're getting into America with a European passport, it was a hideous process to even get the paperwork. And then I was detained at the border. I don't know if you have been detained, but it's sure. A horrendous experience. The humiliation, like the fear that they just plant into you. So I also sitting there, it just confirmed me because I was about to give a talk about immigration, and I'm thankful to the universe that I got that experience there, that I was looking at the conversations that the officials were having with those people that were also detained. And I was thinking, this is exactly where we should have technology. You see a human talking to other human, like one official was trying to understand a data scientist who was trying to describe what he's doing, and he's building AI, right? And this person was not understanding, like, what is that? Not understanding at all. So if it would be two systems talking to each other, there would have been a mismatch like that. But when we have two humans standing and there's a human who has the power, maybe that human, this first one, the official had a bad day, child was sick, whatever had happened. But the decision making a power to do whatever to this other person, machines don't have bad mood, right? They don't have, the child is not sick. So there's a lot of improvement just by reducing the bias that technology can actually help with. And this is on top of the efficiency, because even today, the system that we have built, we have automated a lot of things, including like, how do you fill forms? You just press a button and forms are filled, because the way we collect data and etc. But now, in order to get that digital data into the government systems, what happens? You print it out, and then you go to a lady who starts to type it in. Imagine the waste and all the trees. So I think there's the bias thing that the technology could actually help to reduce, and the other is just the waste that we're seeing. But I could tell you so many stories of how people are treated badly in the immigration process, but I don't think we have enough time to cover them all.
I think these stories are everywhere. I remember when my lawyer calls me and says, you were supposed to get your H-1B renewal, but we're not hearing from them. So you have to leave the country for 3 months, right? And I have an apartment, so I'm leaving checks for my friend to pay my rent. And then I go and I have to figure out where to be for 3 months. And it's just stupid bureaucracy. And there's people who, of course, have it much, much harder. You tell the story of this mother who has to go leave her children behind, go get her own visa, then go back, file again for them. And it's every day. Like this is not something that's like rare. It's the nature of immigration systems all over the world. And at the same time, there's this massive competition for talent. So you're describing the situation in Japan where they have an aging population and they needed to keep the economy going.
Exactly. In Japan alone, like the number of workers they need, like the forecast says that it's 18 million people by 2030, just to stay on the same level. 18 million people.
You're listening to Remake, a podcast about design, systems, and society. If you're listening on a podcast app, you already know how to follow podcasts. So please follow this one. If you're listening in a browser, just go to remakepod.org to find links to all the major podcast players where you can follow our show. So you introduced this idea of the UX of a country. What does that mean?
Yes, truly. I have spoken about that on different stages. I'm looking forward to see which country will be the first one to actually have this ministry. So again, when we talk about design, right? If we think about what it means to be in the country, visiting the country, all of those basically are different experiences. What is my experience as a citizen? What is my experience as a tourist? And the experience means like from the day when I start to think about going to the country to landing there, being there. And then I think one of the problems is, and this is what, when we think about the tech world, we always like what brings the product together is really observing and thinking through all the experience flaws and what could be improved about the overall. Like that, if you go to Amazon and you want to buy this book or whatever, then if you don't find the button how to buy it, Amazon will not be working, which it's everything can be marvelous. But if you don't have the purchase button working, then, you know, you will fail. And companies constantly observe where people stumble, but that's not something that countries do. And I think that's something that should be changed. That and for all parts, is it the student, is it the citizen, is it somebody who's retired? Like we have the UX design lead in a company and UX design, UI designers, like all of that. Somebody who has the ownership of really thinking through what it means to be part or on a journey with this country. My wish is that will be like there will be actually a ministry, like a UX ministry, which will be overseeing what is the experience and design of a country.
I think even the US has some department that is in charge of the simplicity and essentially they call it minimizing the time tax of government, right? So they look at every form and everything that, but isn't there also another component where it's like, who's the customer? So people with a vote are the customers. So they're going to get preferential treatment. And you as a visitor or a temporary worker, I often felt when I was dealing with the immigration system, if Americans had to deal with this system, if people with the vote had to deal with the system, it wouldn't be like this. It would be immediate outrage. But because it's happening to a group of people that don't have power.
I would debate that, though, if you look at the elections. Coming from Estonia, we were amused about the whole elections and what was going on, because for us, voting is online, right? So you go, it takes you literally 1 minute, usually less, to go and participate in the elections. So the user experience of participating in the elections is super good. Whereas in America, you are a citizen, but you have to go through this horrendous process. So I wouldn't fully agree with you, but I do agree that you have more voice definitely when you are a voter. But again, going back to where we are in terms of the era that we are today, which is that we are all fighting for the same talent. We are all fighting for the economies to grow. We need to get people in. Unless you are India, that will have a surplus of talent, then everybody will be lacking people. So I think right now, countries have to rethink that. And what I mean by rethinking is that I think the problem that usually happens in the public sector is that the ownership is divided between too many counterparts, so meaning that there's one ministry who's, let's say about immigration, right? One ministry is the foreign ministry is dealing with embassies, and then there's other ministry who's dealing with work permits. So there's all those different counterparts. But if you think about somebody coming to a country, they don't care is it one or the other ministry. They only care about, I'm going to Israel, right? So what is my experience going to Israel? So I think if there is somebody who's actually owning the user experience, then they would work to understand where the bottlenecks are for different parts of your stakeholders, so to say, right? So in that sense, I do believe that right now countries have to start going, and I believe they will, just some will be slower than others, beyond the voters, because you will just not have voters in 30, 40 years, and you will not have anybody actually carrying that economy. Just Germany, I was just reading this week that now the prediction is that Germany alone will be missing 7 million people by 2050 in the workforce. For a country size of Germany, it's a huge amount of people. So if this design thinking doesn't start to, is not adapted, then those people will go somewhere else, right? So anyway, I'm optimistic, but as I told about the pandemic, I was also hoping there will be more of public sector innovation during the pandemic. Didn't happen, so let's see.
So I love this idea of reinventing the passport for the 21st century and for our time. I'd love to hear your vision of what it could be like. So some of these things are visas or specific things that are being done right now, but some of it maybe thinking a little bit longer term. Where could this go?
Let's look at, like, for example, right now, what we are building in a way is a platform, and the center of the platform is a human who's being relocated, right? What our aim is, and what we're already seeing today, is that we're creating this digital identity for that person who is moving cross borders, which means that with the press of a button, applications are created with the press of a button. At one point, this is not happening yet because the governments, we can't apply directly to their system, but you would be able to submit your applications, right? So what we want to do for the world is get rid of the paper. So get rid of the paper in the immigration trail. But where this can actually expand, so even when we think about the identity, or basically today, when a person relocates through our platform, then we know everything about them. We know their, employers, we know their salaries, we know their family, like education, everything, shoe size. We don't know shoe size, but most everything we know. Is that what we are aspiring towards, is that through that identity, they could actually solve anything they need for cross-border movement. Do they need an insurance that they press a button? Already they have an insurance without filling any forms again. Or do they need a bank account, right? Where we are pushing towards is that everything around relocation management would be digital, including all the other products that you need in order to move around or live somewhere else, including taxes. So I think today, as I said before, taxes are not resolved. This is a problem that needs solving. But if you are 70 and you have worked in 50 different countries or 40 different countries, it will be really hard to collect all the pensions, for example. So this is a problem that needs to be solved. And we believe that through having this digital trail, it will be much more easy to do that.
I think one aspect of this is one identity that serves almost like a universal passport. Wherever you go, you're accepted. I like to flip it a little bit from the perspective of the governments. What do they need? So in other words, why do they let some people in and don't let others in? And how can they be efficient? Because I guess there's some fears that are legitimate. Terrorism,
totally.
Crime. They want people who will obey the laws, pay for themselves, pay taxes, and and essentially just be productive members of society. And so this idea of having a company like yours be a trusted intermediary that says, yes, we know everything about this person. They are who they say they are. They will observe the local law here. I mean, there's millions of refugees in the world, right? And some of them are highly educated and should be desired by many countries.
Yeah, and I think this is what is not working about the current passports. And that's where I believe that technology really can help to solve the problem also for the countries. As I said before, the old system was created assuming that Western countries, people are smarter, more skilled, right? That's the basis of the current movement, and it's not working. So in terms of what the countries need, when we look at the talent shortage, the main thing, and we look at what the governments are focusing on, then most of the governments in the world are trying to figure out how to get more smart people in, and how to make a system so that it's the best dedicated people who come. And in a way, what we want to do and give to the countries is that we could actually, by having this information, we can bucket people. It doesn't matter where you were accidentally born, but let's say you are a data scientist, and let's say Germany needs 50,000 data scientists or 100,000 data scientists, and now everybody with this background could, let's say, get fast track, that you can get into living, working in Germany within 24 hours. So we could actually start by using technology. And again, like there are other players in the world in our field as well. And I think all of us are aiming the same thing, is that we could start by using technology. We could actually, in a way, filter people, not basis on where they were accidentally born, because I truly believe that today the passport system is flawed because it's a statistical error. I was accidentally born in Estonia, and somebody was accidentally born in Afghanistan, and it shouldn't define my future where I was accidentally born, right? So what the technology can help us to do is to start create new type of buckets, and people get fast access here, you get fast access there. And by that, we could actually help a lot of those people, because we move a lot of people also from countries like Iran or Pakistan or Bangladesh, but due to the old system, they still have harder times. So
Mm.
We're making it faster, but still, like, the system itself, the foundation doesn't work. So through technology, we could actually start to bucket people differently, and through that improve the user experience, but also for the countries, give them what they need. They need specific talent for specific moments in the labor market. And I think the other thing is that when I've been, going back and forth discussing with, somebody's interviewing, and then asked, like, okay, but is it safe? Is it safe when it's all digital? And I think this is a question that I believe that there was one point during last century where all the public sector was navigating on typewriters. And there was a moment when there was a shift towards desktop computer, sending things via email. And probably there was the same conversation. Is it safe? I'm not giving that paper. I'm going to actually send it via this cyberspace. And I don't understand how that cyberspace works. Of course, nothing is 100% safe, but by using this technology, we could actually, I believe it will become much more safer. It's much easier to identify terrorists, or basically capture those informations and having, again, those information pieces into buckets rather than having them on the papers randomly across the world, right? So I think the shift that is happening in the immigration relocation space will be kind of like moving from typewriters to desktop computers for the public sector.
Yeah. I mean, the current system is completely unsafe. And so the bar is really low. And there are risks with anything digital, but all it takes is money and technology and like proper investment to secure it, like any bank is doing.
Exactly.
Whereas the current system is such a mess and there's so many loopholes, and it hasn't significantly changed since we've had massive terror attacks, and paper is easier to fake. People are not good at identifying fakes, right? It's a completely broken system. So in addition to being like the new passport advocate, you're also a big advocate for hiring from all over the world, hiring diversely. I think this is really interesting to think about. How can we hire from more places? What's your take on hiring?
Having been navigating in this HR space, I think one of the trendy things that a lot of companies have been talking about is hiring culture fit. And I'm a complete non-believer in hiring culture fit. I really like how Patty McCord, who was the former head of people of Netflix and my mentor, how she defines it. She says that hiring culture fit is like hiring people with whom you want to have beer on Friday evening. Right. And I think this is a slippery slope, because when we are hiring people who are like us, then there's no diverse thinking. If everybody's nodding around the table, you don't really grow from there. Right. So I'm a huge advocate for a hiring culture ad. And it's not easy to do, because we always tend to have this bias towards people who are more like us. Right. So in the interview process, I'm always trying to identify, is that person going to help us grow as an organization? Will that person bring something that we don't have? Or is it that it's more like vanity, that I like that person because that person is so like me, and then we have a good energy, right? And what I've seen, because with Jobbatical, we literally, when we started, our first hire was from Argentina. I think it's like 6,000 miles, right? And I've seen how this diverse hiring, I honestly can say that this has brought us here, because I have gotten questions that I would have not even thought are questions. Issues are raised that I would have never even thought are issues. And thanks to that challenging discussions, we have grown as an organization. And also I have grown as a leader. It's much easier to hire people like ourselves. It's so comfortable. It's so cozy and warm and fuzzy to have likable people who all like you and you like them. But I believe it doesn't help the organization to grow. Because if you think about organization, it's like a human growing. So if let's say you travel to Sweden once, and then you decide you like Sweden, and now all your travels are to Sweden, right?
Right.
If you go to Sweden all the time, you don't really know what's going out there in other countries, and it doesn't help you to grow as a human. So I think hiring similar people, you get stuck like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We do design sprints, and one of the recommendations is to have at least one troublemaker in the group, someone who will challenge and won't let things slide. And I translate that to people as you need at least one Israeli in your team, because
that's good.
Israelis don't let things slide, and they always speak their mind. But I feel like having diverse perspectives, it's interesting to think about it as also having diverse backgrounds and diverse cultures, and not just diverse roles. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Tell me about your team. Like, you have how many people from how many different countries?
We have over 60 people now. I think it's actually over 70 now. And then how many countries, to be honest, from Indonesia, Brazil, Colombia, and everything in between. So to be honest, nice. I have lost count. I don't know. Yeah. But we have a lot of different nationalities. We flew everybody in for an offsite in September. And we discovered that the most spoken language is Spanish. Spanish is taking over our organization. So nice. I actually started to take Spanish classes because of that. But I have enjoyed it so much to have such diverse team. Often leaders I've heard are a little bit cautious or like scared about those different cultures. For example, India, I have my head of product who's a brilliant guy who has helped me to really understand what a great product lead is. And we have other employees from India. Like I have never have felt that there's a cultural difference, more of, that's interesting. That's teaching me something. And I think it's vice versa the same way. If anybody wants advice or has doubt, then I'm happy to talk about it. But I'm a huge advocate for hiring globally.
Yeah, and we should also make friends globally. And I think that's important to be around people who don't come from exactly the same background. So I have a closing question for you. It's a question we usually ask at the end. So in his TED Talk, the philosopher Alain de Botton talks about the difference between a lecture and a sermon. And he says the lecture is sort of a modern day secular equivalent where it's just trying to give you a little bit of information and you make up your own mind. But there's something valuable about a sermon. A sermon is passionately trying and urgently trying to change your life. And so if you were to give a short sermon to young people starting out now in whatever field, be it in government, in business, in anything, what's the one lesson you really think could change their life?
That's a good one, because it's not easy to choose as well. Can I choose a few?
Sure.
And I think this is one of the things that I think about entrepreneurship, and literally having started as an entrepreneur when I was 16. Then I think one of the things that I have learned about building your vision, because I must say that I'm here smiling and it sounds like everything is awesome, but it's super hard most of the time. Right. Then one of the things that to keep in mind, because that's something I think about, especially in the hardest times, is literally that building a vision is like rock climbing. The main thing is that you keep on climbing, don't look down. When you start to look down, you get dizzy and then you fall. Sometimes I start to peek down and I feel how it's making a difference, like thinking, this is too difficult. No, you just keep on climbing, don't look down. So that's basically when we talk about entrepreneurship. And when maybe the second one is a little bit harder. I'm trying to think of how to even say that. One of the things when we entered into the pandemic, then I had this thought that for years, I had imagined that there's one thing that can basically bring humanity closer together. And it's basically when we have extraterrestrial coming or attacking us, then suddenly it's just us humans. So when we entered into the pandemic, then I hoped that it's the COVID-19 that is the extraterrestrial, that suddenly we are hit as one and we feel as one, that it's literally, are you Ashton Kutcher in LA, or are you a student in Kenya? The fear is same, the uncertainty is the same, and we actually are in danger in a very similar way. It seems to me that we didn't fully take that learning, but maybe that's something that we could still take that learning and really think about it. I remember there was a NASA astronaut who said that he really had to exit the Earth to understand how meaningless the borders are. It would be much, much stronger if we are in this together as humanity versus wasting so much of our productivity against trying to create those identities and fight against the other identities. So really to take a few minutes to think about that COVID-19 was the extraterrestrial here coming to tell us that it's our opportunity to get closer as humans. I believe it's possible, but I believe that we all need to think and work around that.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. I loved it.
Thanks, Karoli.
All right, that's it for today. If you enjoyed the podcast and would like to support it, please consider writing a 5-star review in Apple's podcast app or wherever you're listening. It helps many more people discover the podcast and also makes us feel good. Current support for the podcast comes from my own design company, Remake Labs. We run design sprints all over the world, and our goal is to improve outcomes, whether in business or various organizations, through repeated and rapid design interventions. Now, until next time, be well, everyone. See you next week on Remake.